Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, I'm interviewing Monica Graves. Now, Monica is a co-producer on the film A Woman's Place, a film which explores the topic of domestic violence, a very serious topic. Now, she is the director and writer, and she was approached by Lynn Walker, who informed her of my radio show, where you're bringing all women who are doing amazing things in their communities on larger scales. Now, I think it would be very interesting if you told our audience all about A Woman's Place. If you give them a good idea of what the film is about and the documentaries you're doing. Okay, so I want to just say to the audience again, we're interviewing Monica Graves. So welcome to the Susan Brender Show, Monica.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for having me. A Woman's Place is it's a two-part initiative, actually, and what we're doing currently is part one, which is shooting a series of interviews with women or men who have lived through domestic abuse and are now out of it. And the purpose of those interviews, we've got a YouTube channel that we're posting them weekly on as we get them filmed and edited. And the purpose of them is, my initial thought was for other people who are in situations like that, hoping that they would find a video they connected with that would inspire them and touch them, that I can get out of this too because that person got out of this and now they're living a happy life. But we're finding as we do it that they're really very educational for people who don't understand the dynamics of domestic abuse, because you can hear firsthand from people who have been through it. And we've also interviewed some counselors and cops that talk about it. Mm-hmm. So really it's a powerful tool as a whole, raising awareness in our society and giving understanding to people who don't have it.
You know, Monica, this issue of abuse has been around for a long time. I mean, there have been so many women, so many men who have been abused. You would think that issue would go away, that people would do something about it, and the next thing you would know, they would be sort of better. Now, why is domestic abuse still so, how should we say, is it so popular? I mean, that's not the right word, but...
Common, I think. It's, it is really common, and it's funny because the more I get into this, the more I realize it's more common even than we think. And it's happening behind closed doors. And what's interesting is I think in our head, sometimes we have a picture of some big mean guy that's beating a girl, and we think that's what domestic abuse is. But it's not. A lot of times these men are pastors, musicians, doctors, teachers, people who are very powerful in the community that everybody loves. And the abuse isn't something about, it's not about being beaten. It's control. Mm-hmm. It's somebody who's very good at manipulating and controlling people, and so they're controlling their spouse. And there are many forms in which the abuse itself comes out. But the bottom line is they're manipulating and controlling their spouse to the point that oftentimes the victim becomes not a functional human being in society. And so then when they come out to say, I'm being abused, people look at the abuser and they look at the victim and they say, well, everybody loves the abuser, and the victim's having panic attacks and anxiety. Mm-hmm. And so as a society, we're not believing it, we're not understanding it, the courts are re-victimizing them. So it's not going away because it's not actually being addressed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you say it's not being addressed, but again, it's such a common thing, and it's really causing major problems in our society, and societies all around the world. Now, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I want to talk about women in certain countries where if they, and you'll probably know what I'm about to say, I'm talking about in some of the Islamic countries where women are abused all the time for whatever they do. Does your film address people outside of the States?
Yeah, so at this point, on the docuseries, we have expanded to, on a national level. We have not expanded outside of the United States yet, and we aren't opposed to that, but that takes a lot more funding. Mm-hmm. So, we've started small. We've started where we're at. We've expanded out of the West Coast over to the East Coast. We have some potential possibilities to go into some other countries after that that are not Eastern, though, like European countries. Mm-hmm. But we definitely are open to that if at some point the funding becomes available for that.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into you, Monica. Let's talk a little bit about why you became a filmmaker and how does it make you feel? Is it an exciting project that you're working on? And if so, tell us more about the film.
Yeah. Which I haven't mentioned the fiction film yet. And so this whole, where do I start? So I'm actually a mother of 8. I have 8 children.
You have
and
what?
When
you
I
have
was,
8, did you
I
say?
have 8 children, yeah. And you'll see why that's an important part of my story in just a minute. Okay. So at 30 years old I actually had 7 kids at the time because I had my 8th while I was in college. But I decided to go to college to study film and video production and get my bachelor's degree for that.
Where did you get the time? Right?
It was not easy.
Oh, boy.
And so I was able to graduate with honors while I was in school. I worked on everything I could for free. I wanted to learn. I wanted to know the craft and be good at it because there are several reasons I did that. One, I realized if I didn't pursue the things I was passionate about now, I would get to the end of my life and look back, wishing that I had.
Yeah.
2, 6 of my children are girls. And up until that point, I was mostly a homemaker. I did some, direct sales, and I helped my husband with his business, but I mostly was just home. And although I loved that, I know that if we don't show our children they can follow their dreams and do anything they want to do, they probably aren't as likely to do it. So I wanted to show all my kids, but my daughters in particular, that as a woman, you can do anything that you want to do. Mm. You can be a mother too, that's great, but you can do anything you want to do. And the third thing is that I truly believe film, fiction film in particular, is the most powerful medium we have to influence society.
Yeah.
And if it's done well and you're paying attention to the craft of storytelling, because it is a storytelling medium, but you have the right elements in there that at the end of it you touch people's hearts and you've put a fire under them about something, whatever it is. Not because you're trying to hit them over the head with a message, but because you've told them a good story. Mm-hmm. You can truly make a difference. And so those are the reasons I decided to become a filmmaker, which translate over into this project, because this project actually started with me writing a fiction film, a feature-length script that follows a woman as she breaks free from abuse. And as we were trying to get funding, because it takes a long time to get funding, I said, what can we do to make a difference until then? And that's where the docuseries had come in.
Now you said that you got funding for this. Do you want to disclose who funded it and why they felt that it was a good thing to fund?
No, currently we're on a very small day-to-day funding level. So we do not have funding for the feature film yet. We're still working to get funding for that, and we do have a crowdfunding page. And as far as the docuseries goes, we started that off on our own dime, what we had put into our account. And then as we started to crowdfund, we pulled in here and there what we need to get to that next place. Through social media, we've done a couple events where we've met people who are really passionate about the project as well. And so slowly our network has grown, and people who have come along and seen, this is going to make a difference, have tried to help us get to that next step, if that makes sense.
Oh,
so
sure.
We're still in the middle of funding the docuseries step by step, and far away from getting the fiction film funded.
Okay. So here's what I would like you to do for our audience. I'd like you to kind of describe the first film. Where does it all start, and how does it move into the direction of giving people information and education?
And so, are you talking about the fiction film?
Correct.
Okay, so the fiction film, it follows a woman. Her name's Faye Bannister, and we see her in the beginning. In the beginning, we see a very short little bit of a relationship with her husband that is clearly unhealthy. He abuses her sexually, and there's a series of events that she ends up in jail for something that he did. And then has a sister that insists you're not going back there because she does not believe she's abused. She says, he doesn't hit me, you know, and in her mind, abuse is when you're hit. And so thanks to that sister, she goes into a program. The first program she goes into has another predator in it that takes advantage of Faye, and she ends up fleeing and finding a little town that she settles down in. Now, when I wrote the fiction film, I actually had several friends that had been through so many horrific things, abuse-wise, rape, that I thought, how does that happen to one person?
Right.
And then I realized that oftentimes, actually, when somebody is abused, their normal changes. What they believe is normal changes because of what they've lived in. So they continue to put themselves sometimes in unhealthy situations where they are very likely to be abused or taken advantage of sexually again. It's not their fault that happens.
Right.
And so that is one of the big cycles we show in this film, is that it takes a couple of times of Faye kind of putting herself back in the situations before she realizes, I have value. I am worth something. I am worth somebody treating me good.
Mm-hmm.
God, how many details do you want?
well, I'll tell you, we can get all the details that you feel important for people to know. But here's something else I would like to know. There have been situations where women who have been abused they just reach the limit. They can't stand it anymore. And so in that situation, sometimes they commit murder. They kill their husbands or they kill their boyfriends. Now, it's never just justified for somebody to do something like that, but have any of your abused women talked about that?
So none of the women who have been abused have talked about that, but I did interview a cop who talked about abuse from the view of a cop, and he talked about several instances actually where, and the couples were older, so it's probably some abuse that had been going on for 40, 50 years at least. And he said both of them, when the woman had killed the husband and called the cops very calmly and said, I need someone to get my husband in both of these cases. And in one case, when they showed up, the woman opened the door, said he's in the kitchen, sat back down at the table and continued to eat, and her husband was sitting next to her with a knife in his head.
Oh, my.
Because she was so desensitized and dead emotionally. Like, they become very numb because of this constant. And not that it was right what she did. It would have been better if at some point she could have gotten out. But that's a whole other problem, and that's a whole other thing that we've learned about, is that there actually is a physical property, like a reaction that is making it difficult for these women to leave. Are you interested in hearing about that, I guess?
Of course, because, I know through some of the stories that I've done in the past that women, they have a lot of children, or they just can't get they're afraid they can't get another job. It's all about money, isn't it?
Yeah, well, a huge part of it is how am I going to be able to support my children when I leave? Will people believe me? There's a lot of those fear questions. But we've been doing this for a while, and I just learned the most interesting thing last week, actually. I was interviewing a counselor, and she talked about something called trauma bonding. And I thought, why is this not everywhere on every domestic violence awareness site? Because I feel like this would help women to understand what they're going through so much more. But she described it as, when you're in a relationship with a partner, you have a partner, and say they get sick with cancer or they've been in a car accident, so they go through some very traumatic event, and they need a lot of help.
Yeah.
Our body does this thing where it kind of becomes superhuman so we can help them, and in the process, it bonds very, very deeply to that partner. There's this bonding effect that takes place. Wow. Well, our bodies can differentiate between abuse and cancer. Like, they don't know that it's a different kind of trauma. Right. And so when the abuser is abusing the partner and all this is happening, which is a whole cycle it goes through, and often the victim feels sorry for the abuser inflicting upon them, which is a whole other part of it. But they become very deeply bonded to the abuser because of this constant cycle of trauma. Wow. And so there's even a deeper level that I feel like that would help women so much to know that you're not crazy and there's nothing wrong with you. there's something going on a chemical level responding to that person that's hurting you as well.
Yeah. That sounds a little like PTSD. Is there a connection between that and what you're talking about?
Well, there are actually. I've had several women that I've interviewed who suffer from PTSD because of the abuse that they've been in. So I don't know if, I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, so I don't know if those two things in particular are related, but I would say maybe if they're, women are suffering from both in these situations. But PTSD is very common for an abuse victim.
Yeah. Now, speaking of doctors, and I'm talking about psychiatrists or psychologists, they must be extremely aware of the whole notion of abuse. Now, in your particular situation where you've interviewed many people and you've created films and documentaries and that sort of thing, did you ever interview a mental health worker?
Let me think. So I don't know if anybody has that title. Some of the people I've interviewed have also been domestic abuse advocates. I've interviewed a therapist. I've also interviewed an author, and I don't know exactly what her degree is. Her degree is in some kind of I'm not a doctor, so I don't even know the right labels for it, but social and emotional stuff. And her whole study and all of her books are about verbal abuse. So I don't know exactly what her level of education is, but I know her education was studying psychologist type of stuff, if that makes sense.
Well, sure it does. Now, the verbal abuse as opposed to domestic violence, is there a connection between them, and is there something that people tell you it doesn't matter if it's sexual abuse or verbal abuse, we're still damaged?
Yeah, so everybody that I have interviewed, even though many of them have been physically abused, sexually abused as well, they were all verbally abused. And that's the worst of it, actually. The women who have been almost beaten to death said, I would rather be hit than deal with all of the mind games. Because that actually is the bottom line of abuse, is another human being using manipulation, lies, control, gaslighting to control another person. And it goes through a cycle where there's this wonderful honeymoon period. They're so sorry. They're never going to do again what they did again. They see the fault of their ways, and they treat you like you're in heaven. It's so wonderful. And then things slowly begin to change, and the tension builds. And as women live in this for a while, they kind of know what's coming at that point. And then there's a big explosion. Now, depending on the abuser, the explosion might be just verbal. It might be physical. The sexual abuse that happens in relationships often gall. The few people I've interviewed that have that, it's often maybe the husband's a sex addict and he's constantly pressuring them for sex. Either they've just had a baby or they're sick or and they're sleeping with lots of other women. Or they use biblical references to say, well, you're not supposed to keep yourself from me. Just a constant guilt and pressure of, you need to please me. And if you're not pleasing me, then I'm going to blow up at you.
Right.
And so, yeah, the verbal abuse actually is kind of the foundation of all of abuse.
Now, this is one of the things that I think about when I'm thinking about what's going on in our world. It seems that there is so much stress because people work, especially young people, they work hours and hours and hours, and so their patience, their way to kind of deal with life is to come home and take it out on their wives or on their husbands. I mean, do you think that there's an analogy there that the more we work, the more stressed we are, that we just lose it? And that's how... Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I definitely think that can have a factor in it because when you're always on your last thread, it is harder to keep things together. And I know, those victims are always making excuses for why the abuser is abusing them, and that often is one of the excuses. He's so busy and he has so much stress at work, and so they excuse his behaviors. And that doesn't mean he's not having stress. He definitely is having stress at work, but that doesn't make his behavior or her behavior okay. But that definitely is probably a huge factor in it. in many cases.
Yeah. So, what is your biggest challenge that you're now? This is a silly question that you're challenging. What are you challenging now?
I mean, definitely I've been attacked by different people just on social media, like I'm doing something wrong by raising awareness, which is interesting to me.
Did you say you've been attacked as a result
on social media? I have had a couple of different people actually verbally attack me, which I kind of expected because, when you start putting a subject out there that's a touchy subject, people get pricked and want to put you in your place, and especially abusers, who that's what they do. They try to put people in their place, But that, I've expected that, and it's not something I'm going to take personally. And as far as finding people to interview, that's not a problem. I feel like every time I throw a stone, there's somebody that says, "Oh my gosh, I was abused. I went through X, Y, and Z," which just kills me. Excuse me. And that's one of the reasons I started on this too, because almost every close friend I have says at one point in their life they were in an abusive relationship. And that's much higher than the 1 in 4 that are reported.
Yeah. Now, are there a lot of copycats? Because, sometimes people think that if they tell the story of being abused, that somehow they can win a suit. If they sue their husbands, or if the husband sues the wife, they feel that they can get some money out of it. Did you ever deal with that? And, was that part of your story as well?
We have not, and we've tried very hard to, I think everyone that we have interviewed so far, they've been removed from they've been divorced, and they're past the court stage. And we try hard to not have them give the names of the abusers, even try to stay away from locations and things like that. Now, obviously, if somebody sees them that knows them, they're going to know who they're talking about. But our goal is not to attack anybody. It's just to raise awareness.
Yeah. So, okay, now let's talk about some of the myths, because there are some myths to this issue. Can you give us some of the ideas or some of the myths that you think that come out of being abused or maybe not being abused? What are some of the myths on the issue of abuse?
Oh, God. I feel like I could have answered that question better at the beginning. Of the whole process,
well, repeat it.
You're looking, what was that?
I said repeat it, because I think people need to know much more, and from the person who really knows a lot about this issue. So, yeah, again, name some of the myths.
Oh, and I think maybe you misunderstood. I meant in the beginning of my process of shooting all these, because now that I've been staring at it for so long, I'm kind of removed from the point at which I wasn't educated about it. So let me think here for a minute. I mean, you hear a lot the "why doesn't she leave?" You hear that all the time. Why don't they leave? And I think that little bit of understanding that there's trauma bonding that takes place. There's the fear of not being able to take your children. It's not simple. They're not being abused all the time. It's not just some big, scary, mean guy that's beating them. A lot of times the abusers are well-known people in society who are well-liked. Let me think what else might be a myth.
Well, no, that's a myth. These are important myths, and in fact, I was going to ask you about that. Most people think that the people who abuse or are being abused are from the lower socioeconomic strata, but in fact, you just said something. You said that it's all levels. People who are famous, people who have been sort of put in who are wealthy. I mean, people like that. We've heard about some of these people, and in fact, some of the singers. And I'm trying to remember the name of the singer who was abused, and she killed herself. I mean, you know about that.
Yeah, and it is true that it spans across all ages. I've recently interviewed a woman who was 62 that just a year ago got out of an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. It spans across all ages. It spans across all demographics. There is no stereotype. And it is funny that we think, it's in we think it's poor people or, the lower, it's not. And when you realize that, it's a matter of control. Abuse is about control.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who are the people who are used to being in control? Like, those are more likely to be people who are higher up in society, who have money, who are in charge of things, because they're used to being in control.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, the last question that I have for you is, how can people be involved in your project? Is it about giving you money? Is it about helping out in certain ways? Give us. Yeah. So how do they do get involved?
There's a couple different ways. Yeah. So our website is awomensplacefilm.com, and obviously our biggest need is financial. That is, we've got the gear, we have the knowledge to do what we're doing, we have crew, but we need funding. But there's more than just that. So if you go to our website, there is a donate button there. You can watch the docuseries there. We have shot several scenes from the fiction film that you can watch there to give an example of what the fiction film will look and feel like. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think, 6 minutes of footage from an hour and 20 length movie. And at the bottom of our website, there is a contact page. So there's a few different things there. You can sign up for a newsletter, and we send the newsletter out every couple of weeks, updating on our progress. Sometimes we look for volunteers. Maybe we have a need, something we need to do that we aren't experts at, and we want to find somebody who is an expert that could volunteer a few hours. Mm-hmm. If you're on our newsletter, we also send updates. If, like this last week, we had a series of interviews we had to go to in Boston, and we needed the money for the plane ticket to get there. So, if somebody had so our newsletter is just updating on what we're doing. I'm trying to think. I feel like there's one more way I'm missing.
Well, yeah, I know. So we're talking. Excuse me. So we're talking about the fact that you need, of course, money to do the films, and can people get involved in the project in terms of actually working on the film with you?
The film itself, when we shoot that, we will have a couple of big days where we're looking for extras. So if there's someone local to our area that thought it was a great thing, wanted to work as an extra, yes. As far as crew goes, we have most of our crew put together already for the feature film because we've shot a few scenes out of it. Mm-hmm. When it comes to doing the little documentaries, we have had a couple of women that we've met who are abuse survivors that wanted to share their story. And so they have put together, set it up so we could fly out to where they are for a few days. They've arranged they basically produced for us by scheduling multiple interviews for us to go to. And so people could be involved in ways like that.
Right. What about what about some famous people? Is there anybody who is in the entertainment field who can get involved? Because I'm sure, as we mentioned before, that they deal with domestic abuse, and some of them are in trouble. This would be a great way for them to express themselves, don't you think?
Yeah, no. That's actually definitely something we've been looking for, is to find an actor or several actors who would be interested in either saying what they think what we're doing is a great thing, or even committing to playing a role in the film once we get funding, because having an actor attached to your film helps for that funding to come in. Who would be willing to share our docuseries so that it gets out there further. So if they were to watch the docuseries, share it online, join us on Twitter and Facebook and be a part of our ongoing conversation online as well.
Right. So today our guest has been Monica Graves, who's involved in a film that is going to really talk about people who are being abused. Now, this film is going to be part of a series as well. And so I want you to tell them, Monica, one more time, if they want to talk to you, if they want to be part of your project, once more, what's the best way?
You can reach out through our website. We have a contact section on our website at awomensplacefilm.com, and you can message us anything you'd like to ask there.
Terrific. Well, thank you for being on the Susan Brender Show, Monica Graves. You're doing something very inspirational and very necessary, so I'm delighted that you've been on my show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, my pleasure. 3, 2, 1, out. Well, wow. You got a lot to say.
Oh, no. Sorry.
No, it's great. It really makes you wonder. I should have asked you that. It makes you wonder how people get away with abusing people. I mean...
Oh, I know.
Oh, what the hell?
I know.
It's
and
like...
some of the people I'm going to see in Boston this next week, the woman who I originally contacted, her husband and his family own the largest megachurch in the Boston area.
Oh, God.
And so nobody believed her. They tried to make her look crazy. They had retainers at all the law firms, so she couldn't find a lawyer. Not only did he abuse her, but then him and his family who own this church did everything they could to cover that abuse up and try to make her look crazy. And that happens so often.
I was going to ask you about some of the, unfortunately, the religious people, what they do to their wives. Terrible.
Yeah, no, and I've had a couple, actually, where the abuser was somebody who is a pastor or a worship pastor in a church and did not get prosecuted, and that's part of why, because the people in the church wouldn't believe it, and so they all turned against her. And in a couple of cases that I've talked to, and there's the biblical thing, there's like this ownership thing that's used on your head. You're not supposed to keep yourself from me. Actually, if you watch the little short that we have, there are some of those quotes in there, like, you're such a Jezebel. Just things that come out of that, because religion is part of the problem in some of these things. And I'm a believer of God, and I don't think all religion is evil, but when men are controlling other men, you have a problem. Yeah. So.
Well, we should do this again. Maybe when your next film comes out. What do you think?
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, thank you so much for being on the Susan Brender Show.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.